Two children born in a foreign land, sons of a slave who became a prince, grandsons of a nomadic shepherd. Who would have imagined that from these two boys, raised in the palaces of Egypt, the beating heart of a nation would emerge? Ephraim and Manasseh, their names may not be as familiar as Abraham, Moses, or David, but the destiny of these brothers forever changed the course of biblical history. What was so special about these young men that their grandfather, the patriarch Jacob, did something unprecedented by adopting them as his own sons? Why did the trembling hands of a blind old man deliberately cross at the moment of blessing, reversing the natural order of birthright? And how did the prophecy whispered by a dying man over these two boys come to pass in ways no one could have foreseen? Get ready to discover how a moment of divine inspiration transformed two Egyptian boys into patriarchs of Israel, and how from them emerged a nation so powerful that its name became synonymous with an entire kingdom. This is the extraordinary story of Ephraim and Manasseh, a journey of identity, reversed blessing, and prophetic destiny. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh actually begins with their father Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob. Joseph was his father's favorite son, and Jacob openly displayed his favoritism, even gifting him a special, richly ornamented, colorful robe. This public display of preference stirred intense jealousy among Joseph's older brothers, which soon turned into hatred. Beyond his father's favoritism, Joseph also shared with his brothers the dreams he had, in which they bowed down before him. In one dream, his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowed before his. In another, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrated themselves before him. These accounts only deepened his brothers' resentment. One day, when Joseph was sent by his father to check on his brothers who were tending the flock in Shechem, they saw an opportunity to rid themselves of what they considered a threat. Initially, they planned to kill him, but Reuben, the eldest, intervened, suggesting they throw him into an empty cistern instead, intending in secret to later rescue him. The brothers agreed, stripping Joseph of his special robe and casting him into the pit. When a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by on their way to Egypt, Judah proposed an alternative. Instead of leaving Joseph to die in the cistern, why not sell him as a slave? What profit is there in killing our brother and concealing his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, Judah reasoned. The brothers agreed, and for 20 pieces of silver, they sold Joseph to the merchants, who took him to Egypt. To cover up their crime, the brothers slaughtered a goat, dipped Joseph's robe in its blood, and presented it to Jacob, suggesting that a wild animal had devoured his son. Jacob, devastated, tore his clothes and entered a deep state of mourning, refusing to be comforted. "No, I will go down to my son in mourning, to the grave." In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Even in the house of this foreign official, the Bible recounts that the Lord was with Joseph and he prospered. Recognizing the young Hebrew's competence and integrity, Potiphar promoted him, placing him in charge of his entire household. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The divine blessing was so evident that Potiphar entrusted Joseph with everything, worrying about nothing except the food he ate. However, Joseph's journey would take another dramatic turn. Potiphar's wife, attracted to the young Hebrew's beauty and youth, repeatedly attempted to seduce him. Joseph, maintaining his integrity and loyalty to both Potiphar and God, refused all her advances. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he replied. Frustrated and humiliated by his refusals, Potiphar's wife decided to take revenge. One day, when no one else was in the house, she grabbed Joseph by his cloak, insisting, "Lie with me." Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in her hands. Using this garment as evidence, she accused Joseph of attempting to assault her. Enraged, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him kindness. The warden, impressed by Joseph's character and administrative skills, placed him in charge of all the other prisoners. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him and gave him success in whatever he did. During his time in prison, Joseph met two of Pharaoh's court officials who had fallen into disgrace, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both had troubling dreams, which Joseph interpreted correctly. To the cupbearer, Joseph predicted that he would be restored to his position in 3 days, to the baker that he would be executed within the same period. Events unfolded exactly as Joseph had foretold. Before the cupbearer was freed, Joseph asked him to remember him before Pharaoh, but the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him, leaving him imprisoned for another 2 years. Joseph's opportunity for freedom came when Pharaoh himself had 2 puzzling dreams. In the first, 7 fat and healthy cows emerged from the Nile, followed by 7 thin and ugly cows that devoured the first. In the second dream, 7 full and good ears of grain grew on a single stalk, followed by 7 withered ears that swallowed up the first. None of Egypt's magicians or wise men could interpret these dreams, leaving Pharaoh deeply troubled. It was then that the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph and mentioned his abilities to Pharaoh. Immediately, Joseph was summoned from prison, shaved, and dressed in clean garments to appear before the ruler. When Pharaoh recounted his dreams, Joseph replied, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." He then interpreted the dreams as a divine warning. 7 years of great abundance would be followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise and experienced man to oversee the storage of 1/5 of the harvest during the years of plenty in preparation for the coming scarcity. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, who at the time was only 30 years old, the Pharaoh declared, "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God?" The Pharaoh then appointed Joseph as his prime minister, giving him his signet ring, dressing him in fine linen, and placing a gold chain around his neck. Joseph received a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, and was publicly presented in a royal chariot with the command, "Bow the knee." The Pharaoh also declared, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt." Thus, in a stunning reversal of fortune, Joseph went from a forgotten prisoner to the second most powerful man in the Egyptian empire in a single day. This extraordinary rise would only be the beginning of an even greater divine plan, one that would eventually lead to the formation of 2 of Israel's most significant tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. To consolidate Joseph's position in Egypt's hierarchy, Pharaoh arranged his marriage to a woman from the elite. He gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. This union was not merely a personal matter, but also a political and social arrangement that legitimized Joseph's extraordinary rise in Egyptian society. On, also known as Heliopolis, was one of the most important religious centers of ancient Egypt, dedicated to the worship of the sun god Ra. As the daughter of a priest from this temple, Asenath belonged to the country's religious and intellectual aristocracy. Marrying her represented Joseph's full integration into Egyptian high society and an alliance with the powerful clergy. The biblical text does not provide details about the relationship between Joseph and Asenath or how they handled their cultural and religious differences. Joseph, a Hebrew faithful to the one true God of his ancestors, was united with a woman raised in Egypt's polytheistic traditions. The scripture's silence on potential conflicts or adjustments in this area suggests that they managed to harmonize their lives, possibly with Asenath adopting her husband's faith. During the years of abundance that Joseph had foreseen and helped manage, Asenath gave birth to 2 sons. The biblical text specifies that both were born before the first year of the famine came, indicating that they entered the world during Egypt's period of prosperity under their father's administration. The firstborn was named Manasseh. In Hebrew, this name is related to the verb nashe, meaning to forget. Joseph explained the significance of the name. God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. This statement does not mean Joseph had truly forgotten his roots or his family, but rather that God had transformed his pain into joy, allowing him to find purpose, comfort, and a new life in Egypt. The second son was named Ephraim, a name derived from the Hebrew root para, meaning to be fruitful, to grow, or to multiply. Joseph explained, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. The name expresses gratitude for the fertility and prosperity God had granted him, even in a foreign land far from his homeland and original family. The names chosen for his sons reveal much about Joseph's emotional and spiritual journey. Together, they symbolize the transformation of pain into joy, slavery into freedom, family rejection into new family bonds, and unjust imprisonment into righteous authority. Through these names, Joseph affirmed his conviction that God had turned even the worst experiences of his life for good. Manasseh and Ephraim were born and raised as members of Egypt's elite. As the sons of a high-ranking state official, they would have received the best education available, learning hieroglyphic, writing, history, geography, mathematics, administration, and the intricate etiquette of the Egyptian court. They grew up speaking Egyptian as their first language, dressing as Egyptians and socializing with the children of the local nobility. However, the biblical text later reveals that despite their deep immersion in Egyptian culture, Joseph's sons retained an awareness of their Hebrew identity. This suggests that even though Joseph was fully integrated into Egyptian society, he passed on to his sons the traditions and faith of his ancestors. He likely told them stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about God's promises, and about the special covenant God had made with his family. This dual education, Egyptian in social and academic terms, Hebrew in spiritual terms, would be crucial for the future role these young men would play. Growing up between two worlds, they were being prepared for a unique position in the history of God's people. The lives of Joseph's sons were very different from the one their father had experienced in his youth. While Joseph had grown up as a shepherd in the hills of Canaan, his sons lived in the luxury of Egyptian palaces. While Joseph had faced rejection, slavery, and imprisonment, his sons enjoyed privileges, respect, and opportunities. This generational contrast would become significant in later events when the elderly Jacob, their grandfather, formally adopted them as his own sons. After the 7 years of abundance, the years of famine came, exactly as Joseph had predicted. Through Pharaoh's dreams, the famine was not limited to Egypt. It spread throughout the entire region, including Canaan, where Jacob and his family still lived. While Egypt was prepared for the crisis thanks to Joseph's foresight, other nations suffered greatly. In Canaan, Jacob heard that food was available in Egypt and sent 10 of his sons to buy provisions. Only Benjamin, the youngest and the only other son of Rachel besides Joseph, stayed behind. The text explains, Israel did not let Benjamin go with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Having already lost Joseph, Jacob now fiercely protected the only remaining son of his beloved Rachel. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they were taken to Joseph, who was the governor responsible for food distribution. Joseph immediately recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. The young Hebrew shepherd they had sold as a slave 2 decades earlier was now an Egyptian nobleman, dressed in fine clothes, speaking the local language, and wielding great authority. Instead of revealing himself immediately, Joseph decided to test his brothers to see if they had changed in character. Speaking through an interpreter to maintain the illusion that he was Egyptian, he accused them of being spies. They protested, explaining that they were brothers, sons of the same father, and that they had left a younger brother at home. Joseph then demanded that they bring this younger brother as proof of their sincerity and kept Simeon imprisoned as a guarantee that they would return. The brothers were deeply disturbed, associating this ordeal with their guilt over what they had done to Joseph years before. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw his distress when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen." Unaware that Joseph understood Hebrew, they spoke openly about it in his presence, causing him to step away and weep, moved by their apparent remorse. As they departed for Canaan, Joseph ordered that the money they had brought to buy food be secretly placed back in their grain sacks. When they discovered this along the way, they were even more frightened, fearing they would be accused of theft. Upon returning home, they told Jacob everything that had happened and explained that they would need to take Benjamin on their next journey. Jacob vehemently refused. "My son will not go down with you. His brother is dead, and he alone is left. To me, if harm comes to him on the journey, you will bring my gray hairs down to the grave in sorrow." However, as the famine worsened, they had no choice but to return to Egypt to buy more food. Finally, Judah personally guaranteed Benjamin's safety. "I myself will be responsible for him. If I do not bring him back, I will bear the blame before you forever." Jacob finally consented, sending gifts for the Egyptian governor: a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds, as well as double the money, including what had been returned the first time. When they returned to Egypt with Benjamin, they were taken directly to Joseph's house for a meal, which alarmed them. They explained to the steward about the money found in their sacks, but he reassured them, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks." Simeon was released and reunited with them. When Joseph arrived, they bowed down before him, unknowingly fulfilling the dreams Joseph had had in his youth. Joseph asked about their father, and upon seeing Benjamin, his full-blooded brother, he was so overwhelmed with emotion that he had to leave the room to weep in private. After composing himself, he returned and ordered that the meal be served. The brothers were seated in the exact order of their ages, from the oldest to the youngest, which astonished them, as it seemed impossible for a foreigner to know such a detail. Joseph sent portions from his own table to all of them, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than the others, a test to see if there was still jealousy among the brothers. After the meal, Joseph ordered his servants to fill the brothers' sacks with food and once again to place the money back in their bags. This time, however, he also had his own silver cup placed in Benjamin's sack. Shortly after they departed, Joseph sent his steward to overtake them and accuse them of stealing the cup. When the search revealed the cup in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their clothes in despair and returned to the city. Back in Joseph's presence, Judah gave a heartfelt speech, explaining how their father had already lost a beloved son and that losing Benjamin would bring him to the grave in sorrow. Then, in an extraordinary act of self-sacrifice, drastically different from his attitude toward Joseph years earlier, Judah offered to stay as a slave in Benjamin's place. "Now, therefore, let your servant remain instead of the boy as my Lord's slave, and let the boy return with his brothers." This demonstration of genuine character change finally convinced Joseph. Unable to contain himself any longer, he ordered all the Egyptians to leave the room, and weeping so loudly that the entire household could hear, he revealed himself to his brothers. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were stunned and fearful, but Joseph reassured them, "Come close to me. I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." This moment of reconciliation reveals Joseph's extraordinary spiritual maturity, as he was able to see God's providential hand even in the painful events of his life. Joseph explained that 5 more years of famine remained and invited the entire family to move to Egypt, where he could provide for them. "You shall dwell in the region of Goshen. I will sustain you there." When Pharaoh learned of the situation, he reinforced the invitation, offering the best land in Egypt and sending carts to transport the women, children, and the elderly. Jacob. When the brothers returned to Canaan with the incredible news that Joseph was alive and was the governor of Egypt, Jacob initially did not believe them. However, when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to take him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived, and he exclaimed, "It is enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Thus, at 130 years old, Jacob undertook the journey to Egypt with his entire family, 70 people in total. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot and went to meet his father. The biblical text describes their emotional reunion. As soon as he appeared before him, he threw himself around his father's neck and wept for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I can die after seeing your face and knowing that you are still alive." Joseph then presented 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh, who confirmed the offer of the land of Goshen and even proposed that the most capable among them take care of his own livestock. During this time, Jacob finally met Joseph's sons. The text, he briefly recounts, "Israel saw Joseph's sons and asked, 'Who are these?' Joseph replied, 'They are the sons God has given me here.'" This meeting between the elderly patriarch and his grandsons, born in a foreign land, was merely a prelude to a much more significant event that would unfold years later. 17 years had passed since Jacob moved to Egypt. During this time, the patriarch, now 147 years old, witnessed his family grow and prosper in the land of Goshen. Sensing that his end was near, Jacob called Joseph and made him promise not to bury him in Egypt, but to take him back to Canaan, to the burial place of his fathers. Shortly after, Joseph was informed that his father was ill. He took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, now young adults, with him for what would become a historically decisive visit. When Jacob learned that Joseph was coming to see him, he gathered his strength and sat up in bed. Jacob began this solemn meeting by reminding Joseph of the divine promise he had received in Luz, also called Bethel. "God Almighty appeared to me in Luz, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, saying, 'I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make you a community of peoples and give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants.'" Then Jacob made a surprising declaration that would forever change the course of family history. "Now, your 2 sons, born to you in the land of Egypt before I came here, shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine." This extraordinary act represented the formal adoption of his grandsons as direct sons, elevating them to the same status as Jacob's own children. In practical terms, this meant that Joseph's descendants would receive a double portion in Israel's tribal inheritance, a right normally reserved for the firstborn, Reuben, who had lost it due to his sin with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. Jacob clarified that any other children Joseph might have in the future would remain under Joseph's name, without the special status granted to Ephraim and Manasseh. "But the children born to you after them shall be yours. They will be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance." This specification suggests a deliberate and limited adoption, not a general rule for all grandchildren. Jacob's eyes, weakened by age, could barely see. Upon realizing the presence of the young men, he asked, "Who are these?" Joseph explained, "They are the sons God has given me here." Jacob then requested, "Bring them to me so that I may bless them." This moment echoes Jacob's own experience, when he received his father Isaac's blessing while Isaac's vision was impaired. However, whereas Jacob had deceived his father to obtain the blessing, Joseph was honestly presenting his sons to their grandfather. The formal adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh carried profound implications. First, it secured Joseph a double portion in the inheritance, the privilege of the firstborn, distributed between his two sons. Second, it elevated two young men born and raised in Egypt, sons of an Egyptian mother, to the status of tribal patriarchs equal to their uncles born in Canaan. This decision also reflected Jacob's special love for Joseph, the son of his beloved Rachel. Unable to openly favor Joseph without rekindling jealousy among his brothers, as his past favoritism had done, Jacob used this adoption mechanism to honor his favored son through his descendants. From a theological perspective, this adoption fully incorporated Ephraim and Manasseh into the covenant that God had established with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were no longer merely biological descendants, but direct spiritual heirs of the divine promises. For the young men, raised in the sophisticated urban culture of Egypt, this moment represented a formal connection to their Hebrew roots and the spiritual legacy of their ancestors. The adoption emphasized that despite their Egyptian birth and upbringing, their true belonging was to the lineage of the promise. From a historical standpoint, Jacob's decision would have lasting consequences. In the generations that followed, there would be no tribe of Joseph, but rather two distinct tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. These would become two of the most significant tribes of Israel, literally fulfilling Jacob's prediction that Joseph would be a fruitful branch. After formally adopting Joseph's sons as his own, Jacob prepared to bless them individually. Joseph positioned his sons before their grandfather in the traditional manner, Manasseh, the firstborn, at Jacob's right hand to receive the primary blessing, and Ephraim, the younger, at Jacob's left. To Joseph's surprise and dismay, Jacob crossed his arms, deliberately placing his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Manasseh's head. This intentional gesture reversed the customary order of blessing. Joseph, assuming his father was confused due to his poor eyesight, tried to correct the hand placement. "Not this way, my father. This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But Jacob refused to change it. "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will be great. However, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." This deliberate reversal in the blessing order reveals a recurring pattern in the biblical narrative, where God frequently chooses the younger over the elder, defying human expectations based on birthright. Jacob himself had experienced this when he received the blessing instead of his older brother Esau. Now he was passing a similar pattern on to the next generation. The blessing that Jacob pronounced was rich in theological and historical significance. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they multiply abundantly in the midst of the earth. This blessing contains several significant elements. First, it invokes three aspects of divinity: the God of the patriarchs, the personal God who had guided Jacob like a shepherd, and the angel, possibly a reference to the angel of the Lord, often identified as a manifestation of God himself, who had protected him. This threefold reference emphasizes the continuity of the divine relationship across generations. Second, the blessing formally establishes the inclusion of Ephraim and Manasseh in the patriarchal lineage. May they be called by my name and the name of my fathers. They would no longer be considered outsiders or marginal figures, but full members of the covenant family. Finally, the blessing includes the wish for abundant multiplication, echoing the original promise made to Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Jacob then added, speaking directly to Joseph, "Behold, I am dying, but God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers." This statement reveals that even after decades in Egypt, Jacob still considered Canaan as the true homeland of his family and anticipated the eventual return of his descendants to that land. The prophecy that Ephraim, though the younger, would become greater than Manasseh was literally fulfilled in Israel's subsequent history. In the first census, taken in the wilderness after the Exodus, the tribe of Ephraim had 40,500 men fit for war, while Manasseh had 32,200, initially confirming the prediction. Although in a later census these proportions temporarily reversed, over the course of history, the tribe of Ephraim indeed assumed a more prominent role. Ephraim would become the leading tribe of the northern kingdom after the monarchy's division, to the point that its name was often used by the prophets as a synonym for the entire kingdom. Important leaders such as Joshua and Jeroboam would come from this tribe, and significant cities like Shiloh, where the tabernacle was established, and Shechem, an important religious and political center, would be located in its territory. The expression, "a multitude of nations," used in reference to Ephraim, has been the subject of various interpretations. Some see it as a reference to the international reach the tribe would have after its dispersion by the Assyrian Empire. Others interpret it as an indication of Ephraim's centrality among the northern tribes. In a broader perspective, some scholars link this expression to the original promise made to Abraham, that through his descendants all nations of the earth would be blessed. Jacob's deliberate crossing of his hands was not merely a symbolic gesture, it was a prophetic declaration. Through this act, the dying patriarch affirmed that God's ways often contradict human expectations based on social conventions like primogeniture. The younger being preferred over the older, the seemingly weak over the strong, the second over the first. This pattern would recur throughout the biblical narrative, culminating from a Christian perspective in Christ himself, who, though he was rich, became poor, and, though he was in the form of God, emptied himself. Joseph's protest and Jacob's firm response, "I know, my son, I know," emphasize that this reversal was not a mistake, but a deliberate act guided by prophetic insight. Just as God had chosen Abraham from among all peoples, Isaac instead of Ishmael and Jacob instead of Esau, now he was indicating his preference for Ephraim over Manasseh, following a divine pattern of choice that transcends human norms. For nearly 4 centuries, Jacob's descendants remained in Egypt. What began as a family of 70 people grew exponentially, fulfilling the divine promise of multiplication. According to the biblical account, the children of Israel were fruitful, increased greatly, multiplied, and became exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. The descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh in particular prospered significantly during this period. Their communities grew in both number and influence, even as the Israelites transitioned from honored guests to oppressed slaves. Egyptian oppression, rather than curbing the Hebrew population growth, seemed to have the opposite effect. The more they were afflicted, the more they multiplied and grew. Before the Exodus, an intriguing account in 1 Chronicles 7:20-24 describes an unsuccessful attempt by some Ephraimites to return to Canaan prematurely. According to this passage, some descendants of Ephraim were killed by the men of Gath while trying to seize their livestock. Ephraim mourned for many days, and later had another son, Beriah. Though brief and lacking detail, this incident suggests that the Ephraimites kept alive the memory of Canaan as their true homeland, even after generations in Egypt. By the time Moses led the exodus from Egypt, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh had grown significantly. The first census, taken in the wilderness of Sinai, recorded impressive numbers. The tribe of Ephraim had 40,500 men fit for war, aged 20 and above, while Manasseh had 32,200. These numbers confirmed Jacob's prophecy. Ephraim, the younger, had indeed become more numerous than Manasseh, the firstborn. During the journey through the wilderness, the two tribes camped on the west side of the tabernacle, alongside Benjamin, forming the division of Ephraim under the banner of the tribe of Ephraim. This arrangement reflected the close connection between the tribes descending from Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. A significant moment during the wilderness period was the selection of Joshua, son of Nun, from the tribe of Ephraim, as Moses' assistant and later his successor. This Ephraimite leadership would have profound implications for Israel's future. Joshua was one of only two adults, along with Caleb, who left Egypt and managed to enter the Promised Land due to their faithfulness during the episode of the spies. The period of wandering in the wilderness served to forge the identity of these tribes. Away from Egyptian influence, they relearned the traditions of their ancestors and became familiar with the law received at Sinai. The tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, like the others, experienced both moments of faithfulness to the covenant and episodes of rebellion and apostasy, such as the incident of the golden calf and various complaints against Moses. At the end of the 40 years in the wilderness, a second census revealed interesting changes. While the tribe of Ephraim had decreased to 32,500 men, Manasseh had significantly grown to 52,700. This temporary reversal would not nullify Jacob's prophecy in the long run, but demonstrated the natural fluctuations in population growth during that challenging period. After Moses' death, Joshua, the Ephraimite, led the people in the conquest of Canaan. Under his leadership, Israel crossed the Jordan River, conquered Jericho, and gradually took possession of the Promised Land. When the time came to divide the territory among the tribes, one unique aspect stood out. While most of Jacob's sons received a single portion, Joseph's descendants received two separate portions, one for Ephraim and another for Manasseh, fulfilling the special blessing given by Jacob. The land distribution was conducted by lot, but strategic considerations were also taken into account. The tribe of Ephraim was assigned a central, highly fertile, and strategically significant territory. Its borders stretched roughly from the Jordan River in the east to the coastal region in the west, although not all of the coastal area was effectively occupied due to Canaanite resistance. To the north, it bordered Manasseh, and to the south, Benjamin and Dan. Ephraim's territory included important cities such as Shiloh, where the tabernacle was established, and Shechem, a site of great historical significance dating back to Abraham's time. Manasseh, on the other hand, received a divided inheritance. Half of the tribe settled east of the Jordan, in a region already conquered during Moses' time, while the other half received land west of the Jordan, north of Ephraim. This geographical division would have implications for the tribe's cohesion in the future. Manasseh's territory was vast, but included mountainous regions that were more difficult to cultivate, particularly in the western portion. When Joshua distributed these lands, the representatives of Ephraim and Manasseh protested, "Why have you given us only one portion and one lot as an inheritance, since we are a numerous people whom the Lord has blessed thus far?" Joshua responded by challenging them to clear more land in the mountainous region and drive out the Canaanites, who still possessed iron chariots. This episode suggests that from early on these tribes were aware of their numerical importance and sought a prominent position among the others. Before his death, Joshua gathered the people at Shechem in the territory of Ephraim and urged them to renew their covenant with God and remain faithful. "Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." On that solemn occasion, the tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, vowed to serve only the Lord. Joshua then set up a stone as a witness to this commitment in the sanctuary of the Lord at Shechem in the land of Ephraim. Although the covenant was established, the tribes faced the persistent challenge of fully driving out the Canaanites from their territories. Neither Ephraim nor Manasseh succeeded in expelling all the original inhabitants. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites, who lived in Gaza. So the Canaanites have lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day and have become forced laborers. Similarly, the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. This coexistence with the Canaanites would become a constant source of temptation toward idolatry in the centuries that followed. After Joshua's death, Israel entered the turbulent period of the Judges. Without strong central leadership, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This period was marked by a repetitive cycle: apostasy, oppression by foreign enemies, crying out to God, and deliverance through a judge raised up by the Lord. The tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh played significant roles during this time. The book of Judges recounts that Deborah, a prophetess who judged Israel, dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. Under her leadership, along with Barak, Israel defeated the Canaanite army. Led by Sisera, one of the most notable judges came from the tribe of Manasseh, Gideon, the son of Joash, from the family of Abiezer. When the angel of the Lord called him while he was threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites, Gideon responded humbly, "O my Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Despite his initial doubts, Gideon led a small army of 300 men to a miraculous victory over the Midianites, freeing Israel from 7 years of oppression. The period of the Judges also reveals aspects of the tribal character of Ephraim that would cause problems in the future. When Gideon summoned the tribes to battle against the Midianites, he initially did not call the Ephraimites. After the victory, they confronted him. "Why have you treated us this way, not calling us when you went to fight against the Midianites?" Gideon diplomatically calmed their anger by highlighting their significant contribution in capturing the Midianite princes, Oreb and Zeb. A more serious conflict involving the Ephraimites occurred with Jephthah, the judge of Gilead. After his victory over the Ammonites, the men of Ephraim threatened him. "We went to fight against the Ammonites, and you did not call us to go with. We will burn your house down with you inside." Unlike Gideon, Jephthah responded with force, defeating the Ephraimites in battle. This episode reveals the growing tribal pride and the tendency toward arrogance that characterized Ephraim, traits that would have serious consequences in the future. During this period, Shiloh, located in Ephraim's territory, served as Israel's religious center, housing the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. The high priest Eli ministered there, and it was in Shiloh that young Samuel was dedicated to the service of the Lord by his mother, Hannah. Shiloh's central role gave the tribe of Ephraim significant religious influence, complementing its demographic and territorial power. The end of the Judges period was marked by tragedy for Shiloh. After a devastating defeat at the hands of the Philistines, during which the Ark of the Covenant was captured, Shiloh appears to have been destroyed, possibly by the Philistines themselves. The prophet Jeremiah later referred to this destruction as an example of divine judgment. "Go now to my place that was in Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at first, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. Jeremiah 7:12. Israel's transition to monarchy had profound implications for the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Samuel, the last judge and the first great prophet after Moses, was an Ephraimite by birth, the son of Elkanah and Hannah from the hill country of Ephraim. Initially, Samuel resisted the idea of a human king for Israel, warning the people about the dangers of monarchy. However, after continued insistence from the people, God instructed Samuel to anoint Saul from the tribe of Benjamin as Israel's first king. The relationship between Ephraim and the new monarchy was complex. On one hand, Benjamin, Saul's tribe, had strong historical ties with Ephraim and Manasseh, all being descendants of Rachel. On the other hand, the rise of the monarchy diminished the tribal autonomy that Ephraim had enjoyed during the Judges period. When Saul failed in his mission and was rejected by God, Samuel anointed David from the tribe of Judah as the next king. This transfer of power from a northern tribe, Benjamin, to a southern tribe, Judah, created additional tensions. After Saul's death, only the tribe of Judah immediately recognized David as king. The northern tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, followed Ishbosheth, Saul's son, for 2 years before finally accepting David's leadership. During David's reign, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh experienced growth and prosperity. But they also saw the political center shift to Jerusalem, located on the border between Judah and Benjamin. When David conducted a census, Ephraim and Manasseh displayed impressive population numbers, confirming their continued demographic strength. David integrated men from these tribes into leadership positions within his kingdom, but the political center of gravity had definitively moved southward. Under the reign of Solomon, David's son, the kingdom of Israel reached the height of its power, wealth, and influence. Solomon built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, further consolidating the religious centralization that had begun with the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David. This centralization diminished the religious importance of the old sanctuaries in Ephraim's territory. Despite the general prosperity, seeds of discontent were sown during Solomon's reign. The biblical text mentions that he imposed forced labor for his grand construction projects and established 12 administrative districts to collect taxes, reorganizing the territory in ways that did not always respect traditional tribal boundaries. These measures provoked resentment, particularly among the northern tribes. A sign of this growing discontent appears in the story of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite whom Solomon had appointed as overseer of the workers from the house of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. The prophet Ahijah of Shiloh encountered Jeroboam, tore his new cloak into 12 pieces and gave him 10, symbolizing that God would grant him rule over 10 tribes of Israel. When Solomon learned of this, he sought to kill Jeroboam, who fled to Egypt, where he remained until the king's death. Solomon's death marked a decisive turning point in Israel's history. His son Rehoboam went to Shechem in Ephraim's territory to be confirmed as king. The choice of Shechem instead of Jerusalem was likely an attempt to acknowledge the importance of the northern tribes. The tribes, led by Jeroboam, who had returned, and from Egypt, presented their grievances to Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam asked for 3 days to consider their request. The elder advisors recommended that he accommodate the people's demands, but the younger advisors urged him to respond harshly. Following the advice of the younger men, Rehoboam replied, "My father made your yoke heavy, but I will make it even, heavier. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." This response triggered the division of the kingdom. The northern tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, rejected Rehoboam, declaring, "What share do we have in David? What part in the son of Jesse? To your tents, O Israel! Look after your own house, O David." Only the tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the house of David. Jeroboam, the Ephraimite, was proclaimed king of the northern tribes, fulfilling Ahijah's prophecy. Initially, he established his capital in Shechem, at the heart of Ephraim's territory. Later, he moved it to Penuel and finally to Tirzah. Concerned that regular pilgrimages to Jerusalem for religious festivals might lead the people to renew their loyalty to the house of David, Jeroboam made a fateful decision. He established alternative centers of worship in Bethel on the southern border of Ephraim, and Dan at the northernmost extremity of the kingdom. At each site he erected a golden calf and declared, "Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." This action, intended to consolidate political control, directly violated the second commandment and initiated a long history of official idolatry in the northern kingdom. Jeroboam also established a non-Levitical priesthood and created alternative religious festivals to those instituted by Moses. Because of these actions, he would frequently be referred to in later biblical records as Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who made Israel sin. Thus, the tribe of Ephraim, through Jeroboam, assumed political leadership of the northern kingdom, which would often be simply called Ephraim by later prophets. The territories of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh formed the central core of this kingdom, which included 8 other tribes. Over the next 2 centuries, the northern kingdom, Israel, experienced periods of relative prosperity and power, interspersed with political and religious crises. While the southern kingdom, Judah, maintained the uninterrupted Davidic dynasty, the northern kingdom saw 9 different dynasties and numerous assassinations of rulers, reflecting its inherent political instability. During the reign of Omri and his son Ahab, Israel experienced a period of political stability and economic prosperity. Omri built a new capital, Samaria, which was more defensible and strategically located than Tirzah. Under Ahab, Israel became a significant regional power, capable of contributing a substantial army to a coalition against Assyria. This is documented in the Stela, where Ahab is mentioned as providing 2,000 chariots and 10,000 soldiers at the Battle of Karkar in 853 BC. However, this material success was accompanied by profound spiritual decline. Ahab married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who actively introduced the worship of Baal in Israel and persecuted the prophets of the Lord. It was in this context that the prophet Elijah emerged, directly confronting Ahab and the prophets of Baal in the dramatic episode on Mount Carmel. The 8th and 7th centuries BC saw the rise of great prophets such as Amos and Hosea, who directed specific messages to the northern kingdom. Their oracles reveal both the material prosperity and the moral and spiritual corruption that characterized the kingdom. Amos denounced the oppression of the poor by the wealthy, judicial corruption, and religious hypocrisy. They sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. Hosea, prophesying a little later, used the metaphor of a failed marriage to illustrate the relationship between God and Israel. His own marriage to Gomer, who repeatedly betrayed him, served as an object lesson for Israel's unfaithfulness to the Lord. Particularly significant is Hosea's frequent use of the name Ephraim to refer to the entire northern kingdom, reflecting the predominance of this tribe. Ephraim is joined to idols. Leave him alone. Hosea 4:17. Politically, Israel faced increasing threats. Initially, the main pressure came from the Aramean kingdom of Damascus. Later, with the rise of the Assyrian Empire, Israel found itself under growing pressure from this emerging superpower. The responses of Israelite kings varied between attempts at resistance, paying tributes, and risky political alliances. King Menahem became a vassal of Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser III, paying 1,000 talents of silver. His successor, Pekah, attempted to resist Assyrian dominance through an alliance with Damascus, and together they pressured Judah to join their coalition, the so-called Syro-Ephraimite War. However, the king of Judah, Ahaz, instead appealed to Assyria, which intervened by capturing territories from both Damascus and Israel. The regions most affected by this initial wave of Assyrian conquests were Galilee and Gilead, including the eastern part of Manasseh. Tiglath-Pileser took Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Janoah, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead, Galilee, and all the land of Naphtali, and carried the people captive to Assyria. So 2 Kings 15:29. Thus began the process of deporting the northern tribes. The last king of Israel, Hoshea, initially paid tribute to Assyria, but later sought help from Egypt and stopped the payments. In response, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invaded Israel and besieged Samaria. After a 3-year siege, the city fell, possibly under the reign of Sargon II. The northern kingdom came to an end after approximately 200 years of independent existence. In 1722 BC, Assyria completed its conquest of Israel, implementing its policy of mass deportations. The king of Assyria took the Israelites captive to Assyria and settled them in Hala, by the Harbor River, in Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. 2 Kings 17:6. These distant regions in northern Mesopotamia and Media, modern-day Iran, became the final destination of the Israelite exiles. Conversely, the biblical text records, "The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria in place of the Israelites. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns." 2 Kings 17:24. This policy of cross-deportations aimed to destroy national identities and prevent rebellions by transplanting populations into regions where they would be cultural minorities. The peoples brought into Samaria adopted a syncretic form of religion, mixing the worship of the God of Israel with their own pagan traditions. Their descendants, known as the Samaritans, would maintain a tense relationship with the Jews in later centuries. As for the deported Israelites, including the Ephraimites and Manassites, their exact fate remains a subject of debate. The phrase, "the 10 lost tribes of Israel," reflects the lack of clear records regarding their whereabouts after the exile. Some theories suggest that they were fully assimilated into local populations, losing their Israelite identity. Others propose that they maintained some degree of ethnic and religious identity, possibly integrating partially into the Jewish communities of Mesopotamia. The prophet Ezekiel, writing during Judah's Babylonian exile, about 150 years later, offered a hopeful vision. In his famous vision of the 2 sticks joined together, Ezekiel 37:15-28, he prophesied the eventual reunification of Judah and Israel. "I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king over them all. They shall never again be 2 nations, nor shall they ever be divided into 2 kingdoms again." This promise of restoration included not only a physical return to the land, but also a spiritual renewal. "And I will cleanse them, so they shall be my people, and I will be their God." Ezekiel's perspective transcended the immediate political circumstances, pointing to a definitive restoration that many scholars interpret in messianic terms. In the post-exilic period, when the Jews returned from Babylon to rebuild Jerusalem and the Temple, representatives of all tribes were present, not just those of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, although in smaller numbers, descendants of the northern tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, integrated into the restored Jewish community. Anna, the prophetess who recognized the infant Jesus in the temple, was identified as being of the tribe of Asher, Luke 2:36, demonstrating that tribal identity awareness persisted into New Testament times. Over the centuries, various communities around the world have claimed descent from the so-called lost tribes, from the Beta Israel of Ethiopia to the Bnei Manasseh of India. While many of these claims are difficult to verify historically, they reflect the powerful cultural impact of the narrative of Israel's tribes. The spiritual legacy of Ephraim and Manasseh transcends their historical fate as political entities. Jacob's prophecy that Ephraim would become a multitude of nations has been interpreted by some scholars as foreshadowing the universal reach of Abrahamic faith, whether through Judaism or, from a Christian perspective, through the Church, seen as the fullness of the Gentiles mentioned by Paul in Romans 11:25. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, uses language reminiscent of Jacob's adoption of Ephraim and Manasseh when describing how the Gentiles were incorporated into the family of faith. So then you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. Ephesians 2:19. The story of Ephraim and Manasseh, from their adoption by Jacob to the rise and fall of their tribal power, and finally to their apparent dissolution among the nations, carries a profound message about God's sovereignty in history. What seemed to be a definitive defeat and failure with the fall of Samaria was, from a prophetic perspective, merely a chapter in a larger divine narrative of redemption. Jacob's cross-handed blessing with the deliberate inversion of primogeniture foreshadowed a divine pattern frequently observed in Scripture, the choice not of the obvious first, but of the second, not of the powerful, but of the weak. This pattern would find its ultimate expression in the coming of the Messiah, not as a political conqueror, but as a suffering servant. Thus, the seemingly forgotten story of Ephraim and Manasseh remains a lasting testimony to how God works through human contingencies to fulfill his eternal purposes, often in ways that transcend our immediate expectations and established conventions. The apparent historical failure of the northern tribes would ultimately be incorporated into a greater plan of redemption encompassing all nations of the earth. There are still deep lessons to be drawn from this narrative for believers today. The experience of Ephraim and Manasseh reminds us that material prosperity without spiritual faithfulness is unsustainable in the long run. The decline and fall of the northern kingdom, despite its wealth and military power, demonstrate that true success cannot be measured merely by worldly criteria. The inversion of the blessings order, Ephraim over Manasseh, the younger over the elder, also teaches us about the nature of divine election, which often contradicts human expectations. This is a recurring theme in Scripture. Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, David over his older brothers. God frequently chooses the weak to confound the strong, revealing that his choices are not based on human criteria, but on his sovereign purposes. The final destiny of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh among the nations can also be seen as a paradoxical fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham that through his descendants all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Although they were scattered in exile as a consequence of their unfaithfulness, this dispersion carried elements of monotheistic faith to distant places, possibly preparing the ground for a broader understanding of God's plan among the nations. The historical significance of Ephraim is acknowledged in the biblical text itself, when God, through the prophet Jeremiah, declares, "Is Ephraim my dear son? Is he a child in whom I delight? For though I spoke against him, I still remember him. Therefore my heart yearns for him." Jeremiah 31:20. This passage reveals God's paternal heart even toward the tribe that led the apostasy of the northern kingdom. In messianic times, according to prophecy, the ancient divisions would be overcome. Isaiah envisioned a time when the envy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. Isaiah 11:13. This reconciliation between the rival tribes would symbolize the broader peace and unity that would characterize the Messianic era. The New Testament writers found additional meanings in these ancient stories. The letter to the Hebrews, for example, states that, "By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph." Hebrews 11:21, including this episode in the great narrative of faith that permeated Israel's history. When we understand the full story of Ephraim and Manasseh, from their unusual favor with their grandfather to the height of their political power and their subsequent downfall, we see a pattern that is often repeated in Scripture: exaltation, downfall, and ultimate redemption. This pattern reflects humanity's own journey and highlights the need for redemption that could only be fully satisfied through the divine plan culminating in the Messiah. Thus, the tribes that began with two boys born in Egypt, the sons of a former slave and an Egyptian priestess who received an extraordinary blessing from their dying grandfather, became the heart of a powerful kingdom, only to eventually be scattered among the nations. However, from a broader perspective, their stories continue to inspire reflection on the mysterious ways in which God fulfills his purposes throughout human history, always faithful to his promises, even when his people fail. Dear viewer, if this story has touched your heart and given you new perspectives on God's ways, I invite you to share this video with friends and family who may be blessed by this message. Every biblical story holds treasures of wisdom waiting to be discovered, and together we can explore these riches. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos about the fascinating biblical stories that have so much to teach us. Remember, just as God turned Joseph's difficult circumstances into a blessing for many nations, he can also transform your challenges into opportunities for a greater purpose. As Joseph told his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." See you in the next video. May God bless you and your family.